On a lonely highway under the blazing sun, a man pulled over when he saw two tiny puppies sitting by the roadside, standing on their hind legs, as if begging for mercy. Their fur was dusty, their eyes glistening with tears. When he knelt down, they didn't run. Instead, they pressed their paws together as if pleading. Something about the way they looked at him made his heart stop. Why were they alone in the middle of nowhere? And what were they trying to tell him? He had no idea that following those two trembling pups would lead him to a discovery that would break everyone's heart and change his life forever. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning sun hung low over the horizon, painting the highway in shades of gold and gray. Heat waves shimmered above the asphalt, blurring the line between earth and sky. A cool breeze whispered through the dry grass that lined the empty road, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and wildflowers. The world seemed calm, too calm, the kind of silence that makes every sound echo louder than it should. In an old pickup truck, Daniel, a middle-aged mechanic with tired eyes, drove steadily down the stretch of road that connected two forgotten towns. It was his usual route home after a long week of work. The radio hummed softly, an old country song that reminded him of simpler days. His hand rested lazily on the steering wheel, his mind lost in thought. He'd been feeling heavy lately, weighed down by loneliness and memories he couldn't shake. The road stretched endlessly ahead, empty but for the rustle of the wind. Daniel often found peace here. The stillness of the open highway felt like therapy, a place where he could breathe without judgment. He passed dry fields and abandoned signposts, each a silent reminder of how much time had changed everything. He sighed deeply, glancing at the clock on his dashboard. Almost noon. Just another quiet day, or so he thought. But as he rounded a gentle curve, something caught his eye in the distance. Two tiny shapes on the side of the road, motionless, glowing faintly in the sunlight. At first he thought they were pieces of trash, maybe paper fluttering in the wind. But as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. Those weren't scraps of garbage. They were two small living creatures standing perfectly still as if waiting for him. Daniel eased his foot off the accelerator, squinting through the glare of the afternoon sun. The shapes ahead became clearer with each passing second. They were small, barely knee-high, and standing right at the edge of the asphalt, dangerously close to the lane. He frowned, his pulse quickening. As his truck rolled closer, the movement became unmistakable. Two tiny golden puppies stood side by side, their fur matted with dust, their little bodies trembling in the dry wind. He slowed to a crawl and pulled over to the shoulder, the crunch of gravel echoing in the still air. The engine's rumble faded, leaving behind an eerie silence. The puppies didn't run. They didn't bark. Instead, they stared straight at him, their round, pleading eyes reflecting a mix of fear and hope. One of them took a hesitant step forward, its tail tucked low, while the other raised its front paws slightly as if trying to speak in its own silent language. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen abandoned dogs before, strays wandering in alleys or shelter cages, but never anything like this. The way they looked at him wasn't just desperation. It was recognition, almost as if they'd been waiting for him. The older pup gave a soft whimper, nudging its sibling closer to him. Their ribs showed faintly beneath their fur, and their noses were cracked from the heat. Daniel's chest tightened. "Hey, little ones," he murmured, his voice gentle. "Where did you come from?" They didn't move. They just kept staring, their tiny paws pressed together in front of them, trembling slightly. The gesture hit him like a punch to the heart, almost like they were begging. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. Something inside him, something long buried, stirred awake. He stepped out of his truck, his boots crunching softly on the gravel, and took a cautious step forward. The puppies didn't run. They simply watched, as if they knew that this moment, this stranger on the roadside, might be their only chance to be saved. Daniel stood still for a moment, unsure whether to approach or speak. The world around him seemed to pause. The hum of the wind, the chirp of distant insects, everything faded, leaving only the sight of those two trembling pups before him. One of them lifted its tiny paws again, pressing them together as if in prayer. The other followed, mimicking the same motion. Their eyes glistened with tears that caught the sunlight like tiny crystals. His breath hitched. He had never seen anything like it. This silent plea, this human-like gesture of helplessness. It wasn't instinct. It was emotion. They weren't just hungry or lost. They were asking for help. Daniel knelt slowly, resting one knee on the hot gravel. "It's okay," he whispered, voice trembling. "I'm not going to hurt you." The smaller puppy tilted its head, sniffing the air, and let out a faint whine. Its sibling, braver, took one cautious step forward, its paws trembling with exhaustion. When it reached the edge of his boot, it sat down again, eyes never leaving his face. Daniel extended a hand. The moment he did, both pups reacted, not with fear but with relief. The bolder one leaned closer, pressing its forehead gently against his palm. The warmth of its fur sent a wave of sadness through him. How long had they been out here waiting like this? As he looked around, Daniel noticed the desolation of the place. No houses, no nearby towns, just miles of road and dry land. Whoever left them here had done so deliberately. The puppies, sensing his hesitation, whimpered softly again, and this time, one paw brushed against his leg as if pleading. "Please don't go." Daniel's heart broke. He could feel it, that silent bond forming in an instant. He knew then that walking away wasn't an option. Something about these two fragile souls had reached deep inside him. He sighed deeply, whispering to himself, "All right, little ones, I hear you." But deep down, he didn't yet know they weren't just begging for help. They were trying to lead him somewhere. Daniel hesitated for a moment, torn between reason and instinct. The sun had climbed higher, baking the road until it shimmered like molten glass. The two puppies stood there, panting softly, their tiny chests rising and falling with each labored breath. He wanted to scoop them up immediately, but something in their behavior made him pause. They weren't just lost. They seemed anxious, restless, as if they were guarding something. He crouched down again, reaching out his hand slowly. "Hey, it's okay," he murmured, his voice soft but steady. The smaller puppy crept closer, pressing its paw onto his shoe while the other one circled him cautiously, sniffing at his jeans. Their fur was coarse with dust and small burrs clung to their tails. When Daniel offered them a bottle of water from his truck, they drank desperately, licking his fingers in gratitude. But just as he thought to lift them into his arms, the bolder pup suddenly turned around and barked sharply toward the dry grass beyond the road. The sound startled Daniel. Not a frightened bark, but a calling one, urgent and commanding. The second puppy joined in, pawing at the dirt and looking back at him as if saying, "Follow us." Daniel frowned, standing up. "What is it? Something out there?" he asked, glancing toward the direction they pointed. The grass swayed gently under the hot breeze, concealing whatever lay beyond. Without hesitation, the puppies started moving, one leading, the other glancing back to ensure he followed. Their tiny paws kicked up dust as they trotted ahead, their tails twitching nervously. Daniel, driven by curiosity and a strange tug at his heart, followed close behind. He had meant to rescue them, but now it felt like they were leading him to something that needed rescuing even more. Each step took him farther from the safety of the road, deeper into the dry, whispering field, and closer to a truth he wasn't ready to face. Daniel followed the puppies as they darted through the tall, brittle grass, their little bodies weaving between stalks like shadows. The air was dry and still, heavy with the faint smell of rust and earth. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. Even the birds seemed to have vanished. He could hear nothing but his own footsteps and the soft panting of the dogs leading him forward. After a few minutes, he noticed something unusual scattered along the path. A torn piece of faded fabric tangled in a bush, then a small metal clasp glinting in the sunlight. He knelt to pick it up. It was a fragment of a dog collar snapped at the buckle. His stomach tightened. Whoever had been here hadn't left in a hurry. They'd left in despair. A few steps further, Daniel spotted a frayed blanket half buried under dust, the kind used to line the inside of a pet crate. He lifted it gently, revealing small paw prints underneath, the same size as the puppies. The sight made his throat tighten. They'd been living here alone, sleeping on the cold ground and clinging to scraps of the life someone took from them. The smaller pup whimpered and tugged on the edge of the blanket, as if trying to show him something. The other sniffed the air, then barked twice, facing a narrow trail that disappeared between two thorny bushes. Daniel's pulse quickened. He could feel it now. a story buried beneath silence, a wound waiting to be uncovered. These weren't just abandoned animals wandering aimlessly. They were survivors holding on to a memory of something or someone they had lost. He stood there for a moment, his heart heavy. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he whispered softly. The puppies looked up at him, eyes glistening with a kind of sorrow he couldn't explain. And then, without warning, the bolder one barked again, a sharp, urgent sound, before running toward the narrow trail. Daniel took a deep breath and followed. Something inside told him he was about to find the reason they hadn't left this place. The path ahead was barely visible, a thin line of trampled grass winding through the dry field like a forgotten scar. Daniel hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the highway. His truck was now just a faint speck in the distance, swallowed by the shimmering heat. But the puppies didn't stop. They trotted forward with surprising determination, their tiny paws patting softly over the earth. It was as if they knew exactly where they were going. Daniel followed, brushing away the thorny branches that tugged at his sleeves. Each step grew heavier with a mix of curiosity and dread. The air grew cooler as they descended into a shallow dip in the land. The smell changed too. No longer the clean scent of grass and dust, but something faintly metallic, damp, and old. It made his skin prickle. Every few steps, one of the puppies would look back at him, ensuring he kept up. The smaller one limped slightly, but still refused to stop. Daniel's heart ached watching them. Their courage seemed far greater than their size. He crouched down briefly to offer them some water again. They drank quickly, then both turned their heads in unison toward the same direction, a patch of tangled shrubs ahead. A faint whine escaped the braver pup's throat. Daniel frowned, pushing through the brush carefully. "What are you trying to show me?" he muttered under his breath. His boots sank slightly into the soft dirt as he moved forward. The puppies followed close behind, tails low but eyes alert. And then, through the thick grass, he saw it, a slight glimmer of metal half buried in the soil. At first, he thought it was a piece of old farm equipment, rusted and forgotten. But as he got closer, his chest tightened. It wasn't machinery. It was a cage, small, broken, and almost swallowed by the earth. The puppies stopped beside it and began to whimper softly, pressing their noses against the rusted bars. Daniel's stomach sank. Whatever had happened here wasn't an accident. Daniel froze in place, staring at the half-buried cage. The air around him seemed to grow colder, heavier. The once gentle hum of the field turned eerily quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The sunlight glinted off the rusted metal, revealing streaks of brown and dark stains that made his chest tighten. The cage was wedged at the edge of a shallow ditch, its door twisted open but jammed halfway by a clump of dried mud. He took a cautious step closer, his boots crunching on the brittle ground. "What happened here?" he whispered, kneeling down. The puppies whimpered softly, pressing their tiny bodies against his arm. Their eyes never left the cage, wide, anxious, almost pleading. Daniel brushed away the dirt covering one corner. Beneath the layer of dust, he found a chewed-up rope, frayed at both ends, and a small piece of red fabric, maybe from a dog collar or a blanket. The deeper he dug, the more the truth began to take shape. Someone had tried to hide this. Someone had meant for it to disappear. A faint smell lingered in the air, sharp, metallic, and hauntingly familiar. His stomach turned. The smaller puppy nudged at the cage door, whining louder now, as if begging him to look inside. Daniel hesitated. His heartbeat quickened, his throat dry. Every instinct told him that what waited inside wouldn't be easy to see. Slowly, with trembling hands, he lifted the bent latch. The door creaked open with a sound that cut through the silence like a cry. At first, all he saw was shadow. Then the sunlight shifted, and the sight before him made his heart stop cold. Inside the cage, curled against the corner, was a tiny, motionless form, the body of another puppy still and silent, its fur matted with dust. The living pups whimpered, pressing closer together, their cries soft but unbearable. Daniel's vision blurred. He covered his mouth, his chest aching as the weight of the truth sank in. They hadn't just been lost. They had been left behind to guard the one they couldn't save. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't move. The world around him blurred, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The dead puppy lay curled in the corner of the cage as if it had fallen asleep waiting for help that never came. Its fur was the same pale golden color as the others, but its tiny body had gone stiff, the life drained from it days ago. The dry wind whispered across the field, carrying with it the faint rattle of the cage door. The surviving puppies whimpered pitifully, pressing their noses against the rusted bars. One pawed at the lifeless body inside, refusing to accept what had happened. The smaller one lay down beside the cage, letting out a faint cry that broke through Daniel's chest like a knife. He knelt beside them, his hands trembling. "God," he muttered, voice cracking. You've been here the whole time, haven't you?" He looked around. The torn blanket, the snapped collar, the chewed rope. It was all starting to make sense now. They hadn't just been abandoned randomly. Someone had left them trapped here. The two survivors must have escaped somehow. Maybe the storm that passed through days ago loosened the latch. But instead of running off, they had stayed. They had stayed because their sibling couldn't leave. Tears stung Daniel's eyes. He reached inside the cage carefully, brushing the dirt from the tiny pup's face. The coldness of its fur made him flinch, yet he kept his hand there for a moment, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The other two pups watched quietly, their cries softening into silence. It was as if they understood that their wait was over. Someone had finally seen what they couldn't bear to leave behind. Daniel swallowed hard, his heart heavy. "You were protecting him," he whispered, voice trembling. "You didn't want him to be alone." He sat back slowly, the truth weighing on him like a stone. These little souls hadn't just been begging for help. They'd been begging for someone to find their brother. Daniel sat on the edge of the ditch, his elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed. The world felt painfully still. Even the wind had stopped moving. The two surviving puppies huddled against him, their tiny bodies trembling, their soft cries fading into the emptiness around them. He looked down at the lifeless form inside the cage, and a deep ache settled in his chest. There was something unbearable about the silence of that little body, a silence that screamed louder than any sound could. He rubbed a hand over his face, his throat tightening. "You waited here for help," he whispered, voice thick. "And nobody came." The word stung like acid. He couldn't stop imagining how long the puppies had sat there, through heat, through hunger, through nights filled with darkness and fear, refusing to leave their brother behind. The guilt hit him unexpectedly. He had driven this road countless times. What if he had passed here before and never noticed? How many people had? How many cars had rushed past without ever slowing down? He clenched his fists, his jaw trembling. "I should have been here sooner," he muttered under his breath. The braver pup nudged his arm gently as if trying to comfort him. The smaller one lay beside the cage, pressing its head against the cold metal, a soft whimper escaping its throat. The sight shattered him. These tiny creatures, heartbroken yet loyal, had shown more love and courage than most humans ever could. Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes wet. He reached out and gently closed the cage door, not to hide the pain, but to give the little one peace. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "I promise." The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the field. The two pups stayed close to him, their eyes still fixed on the cage. Daniel knew what he had to do. He couldn't change the past, but he could make sure the rest of their story wouldn't end in sorrow. Daniel rose slowly from the edge of the ditch, brushing the dirt from his jeans. His eyes lingered on the small cage one last time, the silent witness to the cruelty these little souls had endured. The two surviving puppies watched him anxiously, their tails low, their bodies trembling. They didn't know what would happen next, but in their weary eyes, Daniel saw something fragile yet unbroken: trust. He took off his jacket and spread it on the ground. "Come here, little ones," he whispered softly. His voice carried a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. The braver pup came first, limping slightly, and curled up on the fabric. The smaller one hesitated, glancing back at the cage as if afraid to leave. Daniel knelt beside it, gently scooping the trembling puppy into his arms. "It's all right," he murmured. "You've done enough. Let me take it from here." Both puppies clung to him as he wrapped them in his jacket, their fragile bodies pressing against his chest. He could feel their tiny hearts beating fast, uncertain yet hopeful. With every step back toward the highway, Daniel felt the weight of their pain and the responsibility he had just accepted. When he reached his truck, he carefully placed them on the passenger seat, turning the air conditioner to a gentle breeze. The pups lay quietly, their eyes fluttering, exhausted from days of fear and hunger. Daniel glanced at the rearview mirror, the reflection of the field growing smaller behind him. The cage was still there, a scar on the land, but he vowed he'd come back to bury the little one properly. As he started the engine, the braver puppy lifted its head weakly and placed a paw on his arm. Daniel smiled faintly, his throat tight. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I swear it." The truck rolled forward down the long, empty road. The sun dipped low on the horizon, and for the first time that day, Daniel felt a quiet resolve settle inside him. He had found them by chance, but saving them had become a promise he couldn't break. The truck sped down the narrow highway, its tires humming against the asphalt. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes flicking constantly between the road and the two fragile lives beside him. The puppies lay bundled in his jacket, their breathing shallow and uneven. The smaller one shivered uncontrollably, its nose twitching weakly. Daniel's heart pounded faster with every mile. "Hang in there," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Just a little longer." He pressed harder on the accelerator, the scenery blurring past. Endless fields, broken fences, scattered farmhouses. He tried to remember the nearest veterinary clinic. It had to be at least 20 miles away. Too far for comfort, not far enough to give up. The sunlight was fading, painting the horizon in orange and crimson streaks. A faint whimper broke through the sound of the engine. Daniel glanced down and saw the smaller puppy stirring, its tiny paw clutching the fabric of his jacket. The sight made his throat tighten. He reached over briefly, stroking its head. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Sweat formed on his temples despite the cold air blasting through the vents. He couldn't shake the thought of the cage, of the little body left behind, and of how close these two were to meeting the same fate. "Not this time," he muttered fiercely. "Not if I can help it." He drove faster, headlights flickering as he honked at cars that moved too slowly. His heart raced with every passing second. Finally, in the distance, a faint blue sign appeared. Harris Animal Clinic, 2 miles. Daniel exhaled shakily, gripping the wheel tighter. "Almost there," he said, more to himself than to the pups. The braver one lifted its head, its cloudy eyes locking onto him as if understanding. In that silent glance, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. He pushed the truck harder. 2 miles had never felt so long. He wasn't just driving to a clinic. He was driving against time itself. The truck screeched to a halt outside Harris Animal Clinic, gravel scattering beneath the tires. Daniel jumped out before the engine had fully stopped, clutching his jacket tightly against his chest. The puppies were limp, their small bodies barely moving. Panic surged through him. He pushed through the glass door, breathless. "Please, someone help," he shouted. The sudden commotion drew the attention of a middle-aged veterinarian, Dr. Harris, a man with calm eyes and a quick, practiced step. He looked up from the reception counter, instantly assessing the situation. "Bring them here," he commanded, motioning toward the treatment room. 2 assistants rushed forward with towels and a stretcher. Daniel carefully unwrapped the pups. They were stranded. "One didn't make it," he managed, his voice breaking. "These 2, please, they've been out there for days." Dr. Harris nodded sharply. "We've got them," he said, his tone firm but kind. The team worked swiftly, checking their vitals, cleaning their wounds, inserting IV lines with gentle precision. The rhythmic beeps of the monitors filled the small room, blending with the faint sound of tiny breaths fighting for life. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, watching helplessly. His hands shook as he rubbed them together. They wouldn't leave their brother, he whispered, mostly to himself. They stayed beside him the whole time. Dr. Harris glanced at him briefly, then back at the table. "That's loyalty," he said softly. "Dogs don't forget the ones they love, even in death." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. He swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing himself to stay calm as the veterinarian continued his work. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The smaller puppy whimpered once weakly, before falling still. Dr. Harris adjusted the oxygen line, eyes narrowing in focus. "She's dehydrated, but she's got a strong heartbeat," he murmured. Daniel exhaled shakily. The braver pup stirred slightly, pressing its nose against its sibling's fur, refusing to let go. Dr. Harris looked up finally, his voice steady. They're fighters, he said. If they made it this far, I think they'll pull through. Daniel nodded, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time that day, he finally felt hope. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight spilled through the clinic's windows, casting a warm glow over the recovery room. Daniel sat in a chair by the metal table, eyes heavy from a sleepless night. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was steady now. Both puppies were breathing normally, wrapped snugly in soft blankets. Their fur had been cleaned, their wounds treated, and for the first time they looked peaceful. Dr. Harris entered quietly, holding a clipboard. His usual calm face carried a shadow of disbelief. "You might want to hear this," he said, glancing toward the microchip scanner on the counter. Daniel straightened, worry flickering across his face. "You found something?" The vet nodded. "Both of them have microchips. I traced the number." He paused before continuing. "They belong to a breeder from the next county, a man known for selling designer puppies." Daniel frowned. "Then why were they out there? Why abandon them like that?" Dr. Harris sighed heavily, his jaw tightening. "Because one of the litter got sick," he said quietly. "It happens more often than you'd think. When one pup gets infected or weak, some breeders see them as a loss. They dump them, sometimes the whole litter, to avoid attention or costs." The words hit Daniel like a blow. He stared at the sleeping pups, his stomach churning with anger and sorrow. "So they were left to die," he muttered, his voice low. Dr. Harris nodded solemnly. "But they didn't. These two stayed alive, died, and stayed beside the one that didn't make it. That's not just survival. That's devotion." Daniel looked at the braver pup whose paw now rested protectively over its sibling. His chest tightened. "They never gave up on him," he whispered. "Not even when the world did." The room fell silent for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the machines. Dr. Harris placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You did right by them," he said gently. "You gave their story a chance to end differently." Daniel nodded, eyes glistening. "No," he said quietly. "They gave me that chance." 2 weeks later, the world looked different. The once frail puppies now played in Daniel's small backyard, chasing butterflies and tumbling over the grass. The air was filled with the sound of their laughter like barks, a melody that healed something deep inside him every time he heard it. Their fur had regained its shine, soft and golden beneath the afternoon sun. The scars were fading, but the story written in their eyes would never fully disappear. Daniel leaned against the porch railing, a cup of coffee in hand, watching them. The smaller one, gentle and shy, was now named Faith, while the braver pup who had led him to the ditch was called Hope. The names fit perfectly. Every time he said them, he remembered the moment they had begged for help on that lonely road, and how their courage had saved them all. Faith barked happily as Hope tackled her playfully, rolling in the grass. Daniel smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "You two were meant to find me," he murmured. "Maybe I was meant to find you too." Inside the house, the once empty living room now had a small bed near the couch, their favorite spot. Daniel had even built a little wooden marker in the corner of the yard, a quiet place to honor the third puppy they had lost. Sometimes, when the evening breeze rustled through the trees, the two dogs would pause their play and sit beside it, as if remembering their sibling. Life had given Daniel a new rhythm. The loneliness that once echoed through his days had been replaced by the soft patter of paws, the wag of tails, and the unconditional warmth of loyalty. As the sun began to set, Hope trotted up to him, pressing her head against his leg. Faith followed, curling beside his feet. Daniel knelt and wrapped his arms around them both. "Welcome home," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "You're safe now, forever." And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't just smile. He felt whole again. A few days later, Daniel drove back to the quiet stretch of highway where it had all begun. The same sun that once burned mercilessly now shone gently through drifting clouds. The field was still, the dry grass swaying softly in the breeze. Hope and Faith sat in the truck beside him, watching curiously as he stepped out, holding a small wooden box in his hands. He walked to the edge of the ditch where the old cage had been. It was gone now, removed by the county workers, but the memory of it lingered in the air. The ground still bore faint marks where the metal had rested, a silent scar of cruelty. Daniel knelt there, brushing his fingers through the dirt. "You're free now, little one," he whispered. From the box, he took out a smooth stone he'd carved himself. On it, he had engraved 3 words, "Never Forgotten Soul." He placed it gently on the ground, surrounded by small wildflowers he'd brought from home. Hope and Faith padded over quietly, their tails low as if they understood the solemnity of the moment. For a long time, Daniel just sat there, watching the wind ripple across the field. His mind wandered back to that first moment. 2 fragile puppies begging a stranger for help, refusing to leave their brother behind. He realized now that they hadn't only asked to be saved. They had carried a message, a reminder that love, loyalty, and courage can survive even the darkest cruelty. A soft whine broke his thoughts. Hope nudged the stone gently with her nose while Faith lay beside it, eyes half closed, calm and still. Daniel smiled faintly, tears gathering in his eyes. "You did good," he said softly. "He's not alone anymore." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. Daniel stood and looked down one last time. "You were never forgotten," he whispered. "And you never will be." As he walked back to the truck, Hope and Faith followed at his heels, their shadows stretching long behind them. And when Daniel started the engine, a warm breeze swept across the field, carrying away the last remnants of sorrow, leaving only peace behind.